record, the fastest player in the history, 30-year history of the WNBA, the fastest player in the history of all of the WNBA's time to reach 600 assists. She did it in just 72 games, guys. Do you think Stephanie White congratulated her on breaking a record? Do you think, but before we get into it, do you think so?
What you are about to hear is not a rumor. What you are about to witness is not speculation. What you are about to experience is the single most explosive, most calculated, and most financially devastating power move in the entire 30-year history of professional women's basketball. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on a secret so massive, so meticulously engineered, and so brutally executed that the entire infrastructure of the Indiana Fever franchise is currently crumbling from the inside out. The front offices are in chaos, the boardrooms are in flames, the sponsors are pulling their budgets, and one head coach has completely lost her grip on reality in real time, right there on live television for the entire world to see. But before we get into the full devastating breakdown of everything that has happened, everything that has been confirmed, and everything that is coming next, let us pause for just one single moment to acknowledge something that should have been celebrated but was deliberately ignored. Caitlin Clark just became the fastest player in the 30-year history of the WNBA to reach 600 assists. She did it in just 72 games. Did Stephanie White congratulate her? We already know the answer. Now let us get into everything. Let us start with the facts, because the facts themselves are already extraordinary even before we layer in the political warfare, the secret contracts, and the administrative collapse that followed. Caitlin Clark, in just 72 games of professional basketball, officially became the fastest player in the entire 30-year recorded history of the Women's National Basketball Association to reach the 600-assist milestone. Not the fastest rookie, not the fastest guard, not the fastest player of her generation. The fastest player, period, full stop, in the history of the entire league. Think about what that actually means. 30 years of professional women's basketball. 30 years of elite guards, generational playmakers, Hall of Fame point guards, and decorated champions. And not a single one of them reached that number faster than Caitlin Clark did. Not one. She rewrote the record books in under 2 complete seasons. This is the kind of achievement that under normal circumstances would generate league-wide celebration. This is the kind of milestone that earns a standing ovation in the locker room, a formal acknowledgement from the head coach in the post-game press conference, and a wave of congratulatory statements from every corner of the organization. When Kelsey Mitchell broke her record in
Shelbourne, letting it be known, this new ownership group is heavily involved in making changes that could have a lasting impact on the team. And this is the ownership group, the Walter Group. They came in and made the big splash for Luka Doncic. They're the ones, they're not bringing back LeBron James. They are ushering in the new faces of the league, and there's no bigger face in women's sports than Caitlin Clark. The Walter Group is looking to get Caitlin Clark locked in LA. They see the malpractice that's going on, and you better believe they're going to be scouring the market for a GM that may have a good relationship with Caitlin Clark or Caitlin Clark's representation, somewhere where they can tie this thing together. This group of this ownership group is looking to make a move. Now, head coach Lynn Roberts spoke about this. She spoke about the important ways. He spoke about Cameron Brink, a bunch of stuff. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of it.
Outside the Fever organization, the celebration was immediate, visible, and enthusiastic. There was energy. There was acknowledgement. There was genuine recognition of an individual achievement worth honoring. For Caitlin Clark, nothing. Let us be very precise about what happened instead. After Clark broke the most significant statistical record in the modern history of the league, her head coach, Stephanie White, stepped to the microphone during the post-game press conference and delivered the following response to a team that had just won. She talked about collective effort. She talked about energy. She talked about toughness. She said, and we are quoting directly here, that it was a collective effort every night, that when they play as connected as they did on both ends of the floor, nobody can stop them. She then welcomed a player back to the lineup with the phrase, and again this is a direct quote, "Steve, welcome back, baby." That was it. That was the entirety of the acknowledgement. No mention of the record, no mention of Clark's name in the context of historical.
With is just they play fast, and I think she helps them play faster. So we've got to be really aware of that, and that's why, you know, our defense on, when did we play? Monday. In the half court wasn't bad. It was our live ball turnovers that just turned into fast break points in 3 seconds. You do that against Indiana, it's going to be 2 points in 2 seconds. So we've got to take care of the ball. You know, and obviously your pickup point begins higher with Caitlin out there. She can shoot it once it crosses half court, and she will. So obviously she's another tremendous player to add to them. And the first time we played them, she played. Last time she didn't. So we've seen both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She'll shoot it as soon as she cross half court. She'll shoot it as soon as she cross half court. It seemed like everybody around the league be recognizing the greatness of Caitlin Clark, except the damn coach that she has. And Lynn Roberts went on to laud about Kate Martin as well, who looks like she might be there long term with the Sparks. Look at this interaction post game between Caitlin Clark and Kate Martin. Yeah.
Austin.
Yeah. Caitlin like, look, man, don't even worry about it. You looking good in this purple and gold. I can't wait to join you. I can't wait to join you in LA, girl. I miss you, bestie. I miss you, bestie. Caitlin is ready to get to LA for good. Caitlin is ready to get to LA permanently. Let's take a look at what Lynn Roberts had to say about Kate Money Martin.
Yeah, at this level. But when she is out there, you know, what kind of advantages do you have when she's able to slide up that way?
Yeah, and I mean, desperate times seek desperate measures, right? So we are, you know,
Don't forget to subscribe, no congratulations, no recognition,
so you never
nothing.
miss a video.
Meanwhile, the coaches around the rest of the league were openly and publicly dissecting Clark's impact with genuine analytical respect. One opposing head coach, when discussing game preparation against the Fever, specifically noted that Clark's pickup point on the offensive end begins higher than almost any other player in the league. She will shoot the ball the moment it crosses half court. She will not hesitate. She will not wait. She will pull the trigger from anywhere, and she will make it. That coach had scouted Clark with the level of attention and respect that you reserve for the most dangerous offensive weapons in professional basketball. She acknowledged Clark's speed, her floor vision, her ability to make the offense move faster simply by being on the court. That analysis came from an opposing coach preparing to stop her. Clark's own head coach could not find 60 seconds in a post-game press conference to say the words congratulations and record in the same sentence. At a certain point, this stops being an oversight. At a certain point, this stops being poor communication or a missed moment. At a certain point, you have to look at the pattern, look at the
minutes restriction off me, guys. That's what Caitlin Clark is thinking. Now let's get to when she actually brings up Caitlin Clark, and she's gonna refuse to give her credit and congratulate her on breaking a record.
6 players in double figures. Ball. See, welcome back, baby. Yeah.
That's all I get, huh? A welcome back. Welcome back. I played 2 days ago. Y'all set me out the day after you played me 15 minutes. What do you mean a welcome back? Because I got to play 9 more minutes today? How about congratulations on breaking a record, 600 assists in 72 games, being the fastest player in the history to do it? No? Won't mention that, huh? Okay, let's see.
Collective effort. See, welcome back, baby. Yeah. Our energy, our toughness, our ability to withstand runs, big shots, so in that. Hey, but most important thing, y'all, 3 wins out on a road trip. Hey, it's a collective effort every night. A collective effort every night. When we play as connected as we did on both ends of the floor, nobody can stop us. Together.
Now, do y'all remember when Kelsey Mitchell broke her record? Y'all remember when Kelsey Mitchell broke her record? The Stephanie White, oh, Kelsey Mitchell! None of that for Caitlin. None of that. Insane. I don't even think, I don't think you can be this, not smart. I think this is being done on purpose.
History, look at the documented sequence of events and call it exactly what it is. This was intentional, and it was the final straw. To understand why what happened next happened the way it did, you have to understand the full scope of what Caitlin Clark had been enduring inside the Indiana Fever organization for the duration of her professional career. The narrative that the franchise's public relations infrastructure had been carefully constructing was one of growth, development, and institutional support. They wanted the world to believe that they were nurturing a generational talent with patience and professional wisdom. They wanted the global audience to see a young superstar being carefully developed within a structured system designed to maximize her long-term success. What was actually happening inside that facility was something considerably different. Internal accounts paint a picture of an organizational environment that was not designed to elevate Clark, but rather to manage her, to contain her, to ensure that her individual market value and her growing cultural influence did not supersede the institutional authority of the coaching staff in the front office. There was a deliberate, calculated pattern of decisions being made that prioritized organization.
Not smart. I think this is being done on purpose. I think it's being done on purpose. We got to get to this article here, courtesy of Yahoo Sports. Caitlin Clark shows discontent over officiating decision after hostile act involving Chelsea Gray. Here it says, with 4:26 left in the second quarter of Sunday's Indiana Fever Las Vegas Aces, Caitlin Clark took on point guard Chelsea Gray, point grandma, because she's done. She's cooked. Chelsea Gray's done. The lady can't move. She moved like Demiris Dantas. It's over. It ended in another highly debated foul call as Clark tried, as Clark tried to defend Gray from making the basket, the two players made contact. And right as the Aces star took the shot, Clark went down, prompting a review from the refs. Clark, down after contact with Chelsea Gray, pops up and is not happy with the foul call. Now play is being reviewed for a hostile act after the whistle, WNBA beat writer Tony East wrote and posted a clip. It says Becky Hammond looked baffled as the officials went to the screen. Hammond even argued her case with the officials, but they looked into the foul regardless. As the officials reviewed the sequence, Clark stayed down, holding her back, and fans feared the worst. However, as she got up, the officials assessed it as a common foul for Clark, and the Fever star immediately protested. She said, "It's not a foul." She said as Stephanie White prevented the situation from getting any worse and guided her to the bench because Caitlin Clark don't need to get no more texts. Clark is already on 5 technicals, and the Indiana Fever does not want her suspended for 1 game. Clark's fitness also remains a concern for the Fever after she missed 2 games because of the back injury she picked up June 24th versus the Mercury. Here it says, oftentimes when you're coming back from injury, fatigue is also a factor, and building endurance is also a factor. When you're fatigued, you have a tendency to get hurt.
Control over
Don't forget to
competitive
subscribe
excellence.
and turn on the notification
Bench rotation
bell
management
so
was
you
the
never
first
miss a
visible
video.
symptom. Clark, despite being the most impactful player on the roster and the most commercially significant athlete the franchise had ever employed, was regularly subjected to minute restrictions and rotation decisions that defied conventional basketball logic. Players with significantly less statistical impact were being given extended floor time in critical game situations, while Clark sat on the bench and watched opportunities pass. This was not development, this was containment. The late game isolation was the second symptom. In moments where the game was on the line, in the precise situations where Clark's elite decision-making and offensive creation ability should have been deployed at maximum capacity, the coaching staff was engineering systems that removed her from primary offensive responsibility. The ball was being directed away from her hands in the moments that mattered most. Her opportunities to demonstrate her full competitive ceiling were being systematically limited through tactical choices that had no defensible basketball rationale. This was not strategy, this was suppression. The press room conduct was the third symptom, and perhaps the most publicly visible. A head coach's press conference behavior creates the organizational narrative that the entire media ecosystem operates within. When a coach consistently refuses to acknowledge a player's achievements, consistently redirects credit toward collective performance rather than individual excellence, and consistently avoids providing the kind of public recognition that a record-breaking player has objectively earned, that coach is sending a very clear message to the entire sports world. That message is, this player is not the priority here, this organization is the priority, this coaching staff is the priority, the star plays for us, we do not play for the star. For someone with Clark's level of competitive intelligence, market awareness, and genuine understanding of her own historical significance, sitting inside that environment and watching it operate around her must have been an experience of profound professional frustration. And it was inside that environment of manufactured limitations and deliberate suppression that a plan was quietly and methodically being built. Here is where the story shifts from frustrating to fascinating. While the Indiana Fever's administrative structure was busy engineering its system of managed containment, Clark was doing something far more strategically significant. She was building relationships. She was identifying allies. She was mapping out exactly who, within her professional circle, had demonstrated genuine loyalty versus institutional compliance. And the person who emerged at the center of that inner circle was Sophie. Sophie was not just a teammate. Sophie was the one constant presence who had consistently demonstrated authentic solidarity through every administrative betrayal, every inexplicable coaching decision, and every moment where the institutional machinery of the Fever had prioritized organizational optics over player well-being. When Clark was being quietly managed and systematically limited, Sophie was the one who stood beside her without political calculation, without self-protective hedging, and without the kind of conditional loyalty that dissolves the moment organizational pressure is applied. Their bond was forged in the specific crucible of shared professional adversity, and that kind of alliance is fundamentally different from standard teammate chemistry. It is not built on shared success. It is built on shared struggle, and that makes it virtually unbreakable. When the Los Angeles Sparks came calling, Clark already knew exactly what she was going to do. She had known for months. The only question was the terms, and the most important term had nothing to do with dollars. The most important term had to do with loyalty. Clark looked at the West Coast executives who were prepared to write the most significant contract offer in the modern history of women's professional basketball. And she delivered an ultimatum that was so clear, so non-negotiable, and so completely unexpected that it reportedly stopped the room cold. Sign Sophie, give her premium contract terms, bring her to Los Angeles alongside me. Where I walk. The entire $50 million deal, the entire partnership, the entire vision that the Sparks ownership group had been building around the possibility of securing Clark for their franchise, every single piece of it goes back to zero if Sophie is not part of the agreement. The West Coast executives did not deliberate for days. They did not commission studies. They did not convene committees to analyze the financial implications of a dual acquisition. They understood immediately what was on the table, and they understood immediately what the correct response was. They said yes. And in doing so, they did not just sign two basketball players. They executed the most strategically brilliant dual acquisition in the history of the sport and simultaneously delivered the most devastating competitive blow to the Indiana Fever organization that any rival could have engineered. To fully appreciate the scale of what the Los Angeles Sparks executed, you need to understand who is making these decisions and why they have the resources and the aggressive institutional mentality to move at the speed they moved. The ownership group behind this operation, the Walter Group, is not a collection of passive investors looking to hold a sports asset and collect dividends. These are aggressive, globally connected capital architects who have already demonstrated, in the most visible way possible, that they are willing to make the kinds of dramatic, headline-generating moves that reshape the competitive landscape of entire leagues. This is the same ownership group that made the massive splash acquisition of Luka Doncic on the men's side. This is the same group that made the deliberate institutional choice not to re-sign LeBron James, choosing instead to usher in the next generation of franchise-defining talent rather than extending the legacy era. This is a group that understands with precise financial clarity that the future of sports investment is not about preserving what already exists. It is about identifying what is coming next and positioning your assets to capture the maximum value from that transition. And in the current sports and entertainment landscape, there is no more powerful, more commercially dynamic, or more globally relevant figure in women's athletics than Caitlin Clark. Mona Shelburne had already reported that this ownership group was heavily involved in making changes with lasting impact on the franchise. That language, heavily involved, is the kind of language that indicates an ownership group that is not simply delegating decisions to existing front office personnel. This is a group that is directly engaged, directly informed, and directly driving the strategic agenda. They were scouring the market for general manager candidates who had existing relationships with Clark or with Clark's representation. They were building the organizational infrastructure around the possibility of her arrival before any contract had been formally presented. The move for Clark was not reactive. It was not opportunistic. It was a meticulously planned long-term acquisition strategy that had been developing behind the scenes for months before the public announcement ever reached the internet. And when the moment arrived, when Clark delivered her ultimatum about Sophie, the Walter Group did not flinch. They saw the dual acquisition not as a complication but as an opportunity. Two elite players leaving a dysfunctional organizational environment together strengthens the narrative of their new franchise while simultaneously accelerating the competitive and commercial collapse of the franchise they are leading.
Don't forget to subscribe.
That is not just a basketball decision. That is a business decision of the highest order. The financial architecture of the deal itself was reportedly constructed with considerable sophistication. Rather than simply presenting a standard contract offer and navigating the luxury tax implications through conventional means, the Sparks front office developed a dual payroll structure that leveraged external West Coast technology sector partnerships to create financial arrangements that operated outside the traditional luxury tax calculation framework. This is the kind of financial engineering that only becomes possible when your ownership group has the global capital network and the institutional legal sophistication to access it. The Indiana Fever's front office, by contrast, was watching all of this happen from the inside of an organization that had spent the previous seasons prioritizing institutional control over competitive investment. They had the asset, they failed to protect it, and now they were watching it leave through a door they did not even realize was open. The internal collapse of the Indiana Fever organization in the aftermath of the leaked acquisition news is one of the most dramatic administrative meltdowns in the recent history of professional sports management. When the confidential financial details of the dual contract began circulating beyond the secure digital channels they were supposed to remain within, the reaction inside the Indiana facility was not measured or composed. It was described by multiple internal sources as nothing short of complete and total institutional panic. Emergency board meetings were convened with virtually no notice. Primary shareholders, the investors who had committed significant financial resources to the Fever franchise on the assumption that their most valuable asset was secured for the foreseeable future, were demanding immediate accountability from every level of the organization's leadership structure. The questions being asked in those rooms were direct and unsparing. How did this happen without warning? How did we not see this coming? Who was responsible for maintaining the relationship with Clark, and what were they doing while she was building an exit strategy directly under their institutional roof? The answers to those questions were not satisfying, because the honest answer, the answer that the data and the documented behavioral patterns of the organization actually support, is that the Indiana Fever's front office and coaching staff had been so focused on managing Clark rather than supporting her that they had completely failed to notice the warning signs of a player who had made a private decision to leave. They were so busy constructing systems to contain her that they never stopped to ask whether those systems were pushing her toward the exit. They were so committed to maintaining institutional authority over a generational talent that they never paused to consider what would happen if that talent decided their authority simply did not apply anymore. And Stephanie White, the head coach who had stood at the microphone after a record-breaking performance and chosen to lead with the phrase collective effort rather than the phrase congratulations on making history, was now sitting at the center of the most complete and total professional unraveling of any coaching career in the recent memory of the sport. Let us talk about Stephanie White specifically. Because what has happened to her professional reputation in the wake of this dual acquisition represents one of the most rapid and complete institutional destructions of coaching credibility that the WNBA has ever witnessed. The documented pattern of White's coaching behavior toward Clark has been thoroughly reviewed by analysts, former players, sports journalists, and millions of fans who have watched every press conference, every post-game interview, and every public interaction between the head coach and her franchise player with increasing incredulity. The record comparison alone is damning enough. When Kelsey Mitchell reached a personal milestone inside the Fever organization, White's response was enthusiastic, public, and immediate. There was visible celebration. There was genuine acknowledgement. There was a coach who understood that recognizing individual achievement is part of the job description, not an optional extra. When Caitlin Clark became the fastest player in the 30-year history of the entire league to reach 600 assists, White talked about collective effort and welcomed another player back to the lineup. This is not an accident. This is not forgetfulness. This is not a coach who was simply caught up in the moment and failed to remember to mention something significant. This is a deliberate, calculated pattern of non-recognition that has been consistent across enough documented public moments that the only intellectually honest conclusion available is that it is intentional. And the sports world noticed. The commentary coming from rival coaches, analysts, and media personalities in the immediate aftermath of Clark's record was a remarkable testament to the gap between how the rest of the professional basketball community perceived Clark's significance and how her own head coach was choosing to represent it. The opposing coach, who detailed Clark's ability to shoot the ball the moment it crossed half-court, who specifically designed defensive schemes around her offensive range and her speed, who treated preparation against Clark as one of the most complex tactical challenges her staff would face all season. That coach was showing more public respect for Clark's abilities than the coach who was supposed to be maximizing them every single day. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it communicates to a player of Clark's intelligence and self-awareness when she can objectively observe that the teams trying to stop her have a more accurate and more respectful understanding of her capabilities than the coaching staff that is supposed to be developing them. That is a profoundly alienating experience, and it is one of the most powerful drivers of a player's decision to seek a different organizational environment. White's post-acquisition behavior has done nothing to slow the collapse. The emergency board meetings are continuing. The public pressure is intensifying. The sponsors who had aligned their marketing investments with the Indiana Fever's position as the home franchise of the sport's most commercially valuable player are now confronting the reality that the player is gone, and they need to decide very quickly what their relationship with this franchise actually represents going forward. The comfortable illusion of institutional authority that White and the Fever's front office had been operating within has completely disintegrated. There is no damage control statement sophisticated enough, no press conference performance measured enough to rebuild the credibility that has been lost here. The reckoning has arrived, and it is not finished. Before the full scope of the Los Angeles move became public, there was another moment that encapsulated the complicated and physically precarious situation Clark had been navigating inside the Fever's competitive environment. During the Indiana Fever's game against the Las Vegas Aces, with 4 minutes and 26 seconds remaining in the second quarter, Clark found herself in a defensive contest against Aces point guard Chelsea Gray. The play resulted in contact between the two players, followed by a contested foul call and then a review for a potential hostile act after the whistle. The sequence created immediate anxiety among Clark's fan base and within the Fever organization, but for somewhat different reasons. For the fans, the concern was simple and immediate. Clark went down. She stayed on the floor holding her back. This was not a new injury worry. Clark had already missed 2 games following a back injury sustained on June 24th against the Mercury, and every subsequent physical confrontation carried elevated risk implications during the recovery process. As Clark got back to her feet and the officials concluded their review, the foul was assessed as a common foul against Clark rather than a hostile act against her. And Clark's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. She turned to the nearest official and said with complete directness, "It's not a foul." Stephanie White, to her credit in this particular moment, stepped in to prevent the situation from escalating further. Clark was already carrying 5 technical fouls at that point in the season, and the Indiana organization had no interest in watching their franchise player serve a suspension while navigating both a back injury recovery and the elevated competitive stakes of a season that was rapidly becoming about much more than basketball games. The officiating controversy itself generated significant debate. Becky Hammond, coaching the Aces, was visibly confused by the decision to review the sequence at all, and she made her case to the officials on the floor. The Aces' perspective was that their player had taken a legitimate shot and been fouled in the act, not that she had committed a hostile act against Clark. What the clip actually showed was the kind of physical confrontation that happens dozens of times in every professional basketball game, elevated to a moment of enormous public scrutiny simply because Caitlin Clark was involved. The global audience that watches every game Clark participates in with the kind of microscopic attention that only the very highest profile athletes in any sport ever receive ensures that every contact, every call, and every moment of physical adversity becomes a news event. Beneath the officiating debate was a more substantive concern. The sports medicine reality of an athlete returning from a back injury is straightforward and unforgiving. Fatigue is a genuine factor in the recovery process. Building endurance takes time, and during that time the body is more vulnerable to additional injury because the muscular support systems that protect joints and soft tissue are not yet operating at full capacity. When fatigue sets in, the risk of new injury escalates significantly. Clark was managing all of this: the back recovery, the minute restrictions that the injury necessitated, the competitive stakes of every game, the organizational environment she was navigating, and the private knowledge of the decisions she had already made about her future simultaneously. And she was doing it while breaking historical records. The level of mental and physical compartmentalization required to perform at the level she was performing under those circumstances is genuinely extraordinary. It speaks to a level of professional discipline and personal fortitude that goes far beyond what most athletes in any sport ever demonstrate. There is a moment, captured on camera in the post-game interaction between Clark and Kate Martin, that deserves its own dedicated examination because it communicates more about Clark's state of mind and her relationship with her future than any press conference statement or media report could possibly convey. Kate Martin, Clark's former teammate and one of her closest friends in professional basketball, had already made the transition to the Los Angeles Sparks. And in the aftermath of this particular game, Clark's interaction with Martin in the post-game environment was the kind of moment that, once you understand the full context of what was happening behind the scenes, takes on an entirely different dimension of meaning. The body language, the conversation, the visible warmth and the genuine energy between two players who clearly share an authentic bond. Clark looked at Martin in that purple and gold, in the colors of the franchise that had already been quietly working to bring Clark herself into the same organizational family, and the message in that interaction was something that words in a formal press conference setting can never fully capture. That was the image of a player who had already decided where she was going. That was the interaction of two athletes who already knew that the separation was temporary. And for anyone watching who understood what was actually happening beneath the surface of the public competitive landscape, it was one of the most telling moments of the entire season. Lynn Roberts, the Sparks head coach, had been vocal about Kate Martin and what she brings to the Los Angeles system. The way Roberts talked about Martin, the way she analyzed the advantages Martin creates within their defensive flexibility, the way she communicated genuine appreciation for what Martin contributes to the organizational culture, was itself a statement about the kind of environment the Sparks were building. This was a franchise that recognized its players. This was a franchise that celebrated individual contributions within a collective system rather than using the collective as a mechanism to obscure individual achievement. This was a franchise whose head coach talked about her players the way a head coach is supposed to talk about her players. The contrast with what Clark had been experiencing in Indiana could not have been more stark. And that contrast, visible to anyone paying attention, made the decision Clark had already made feel not just strategically correct but emotionally and professionally necessary. What Clark has executed here is not simply a career move. It is not simply a franchise decision. It is not simply the story of one exceptional athlete choosing a different organizational environment for personal and professional reasons. What Clark has executed is a blueprint. A documented, publicly visible, historically significant blueprint for how the most valuable athletes in professional sports can leverage their market power, their cultural significance, and their genuine understanding of their own worth to reshape the power dynamics of entire leagues. For decades, the conventional structure of professional sports has operated on a fundamental assumption that the institution has more leverage than the individual. That the franchise, the coaching staff, the front office, the organizational brand holds more negotiating power than even the most exceptional player who plays within its system. Players were managed within that framework. They were developed within it, traded within it, and ultimately defined by it. Clark just dismantled that assumption in the most public, most complete, and most economically consequential way possible. By understanding her own market value with genuine precision, by building authentic alliances rather than institutional loyalties, by recognizing the difference between an organization that is investing in her future and an organization that is managing her present, by leveraging a $50 million offer not just for herself, but as a tool to secure premium conditions for the person whose loyalty had been unconditional throughout her entire professional experience. And by doing all of this simultaneously in a coordinated, strategically layered way that left the opposing organization with no time to respond and no leverage to retain. The Indiana Fever now faces the challenge of rebuilding an organizational identity without the player who had single-handedly transformed their commercial value, their media visibility, and their competitive relevance. Every sponsor conversation, every ticket sales projection, every broadcast rights negotiation that had been built around Clark's presence now has to be completely reconstructed. That is the economic reality of what happens when an organization mistakes institutional authority for genuine relationship building. That is the competitive cost of prioritizing control over trust. Other franchises in the league are watching this with extraordinary attention, because the lesson embedded in what Clark and Sophie have done is not subtle. The lesson is exceptional talent, given the choice between an organization that manages it and an organization that honors it, will choose the organization that honors it, every time, without exception. Franchises that are investing in genuine relationships with their most important players, that are building organizational cultures of authentic recognition and genuine competitive empowerment, are going to retain their talent. The franchises that are operating under the old assumption that institutional authority is sufficient to keep generational players in place are about to discover, one by one, the same painful truth that Indiana just learned. The athletes are no longer waiting for the institutions to change. They are changing the institutions by leaving them. The corporate and competitive fallout from this dual acquisition is not finished. It has barely begun. The Indiana Fever's front office is currently operating in a state of emergency management that is consuming resources, attention, and institutional energy at a rate that is unsustainable over any meaningful period of time. The emergency board meetings are ongoing. The shareholder pressure is building. The questions about accountability are not going away. And the public narrative, shaped by millions of fans who have been watching the pattern of Stephanie White's behavior toward Clark for an entire season, is not one that any amount of carefully crafted press releases can reframe. The pressure for immediate coaching changes is real. The calls for front office accountability are legitimate. And the franchise's ability to recruit replacement talent of comparable market value to what they have just lost is genuinely compromised by the very public documentation of how they managed the most significant player in their organizational history. Who's going to look at the Indiana Fever's track record and conclude that this is an organization committed to maximizing the potential of exceptional talent? Who's going to review the documented sequence of events, the minute restrictions, the rotation decisions, the press conference non-acknowledgements, the systematic absence of recognition for record-breaking achievement, and decide that this is the professional environment they want to invest their career in? The competitive and commercial consequences of organizational culture are not abstract. They are measurable. They show up in recruitment. They show up in retention. They show up in the quality of players who choose your franchise over the alternatives. And right now, the Indiana Fever's organizational culture has been documented, analyzed, and publicly adjudicated by the most visible and commercially significant player the league has ever employed. That is not a recoverable narrative through conventional means. This requires genuine institutional transformation at every level. New leadership, new culture, new commitment to a different set of organizational values, and that transformation takes years, not months. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the story is a different one entirely.
So you never miss a video.
The Sparks are building something. The Walter Group's investment philosophy, their willingness to make dramatic, headline-defining moves, their demonstrated commitment to acquiring the next generation of franchise-defining talent rather than preserving legacy arrangements, all of it points toward an organizational vision with real long-term ambition. Clark and Sophie arriving together as partners rather than as acquisitions, with an authentic alliance forged through shared adversity rather than organizational assignment, brings a foundation that most franchises would require years of careful roster construction to develop naturally. The chemistry is already there. The trust is already there. The shared understanding of what an unsupportive organizational environment looks like and the mutual commitment to building something different is already there. The Los Angeles Sparks, under the billion-dollar stewardship of the Walter Group, with Caitlin Clark and Sophie at the center of their competitive identity, are positioned to become the most commercially powerful and competitively dominant franchise in the history of women's professional basketball. And the entire sports world is going to watch it happen in real time. Here is what we know with complete certainty tonight. Caitlin Clark broke a 30-year record and received a press conference dedicated to collective effort. She responded by engineering the most devastating dual exit in the history of professional women's basketball. She secured her future. She secured her allies' future. And she left an entire franchise to confront the catastrophic consequences of choosing control over genuine respect. This is not the end of a chapter. This is the end of an entire era of how professional sports organizations believed they could treat their most valuable assets and face no consequences. The consequences have arrived, they are documented, they are public, and they are permanent. For Caitlin Clark, this is the beginning. For Sophie, this is the elevation they both deserve. For the Indiana Fever, this is the reckoning that their own organizational decisions made inevitable. And for every single athlete watching this unfold from their own locker rooms, inside their own complicated organizational environments, carrying their own private calculations about loyalty and leverage and the true cost of staying somewhere that refuses to honor what you have built, this is the blueprint. The blueprint is now live, and nothing about professional sports will ever operate quite the same way again.